Hello, everyone, and welcome to our daily roundup. This is our opportunity to go through some of the stories of the day and in the last 24 hours or so, as well, to highlight some of the incredible work that we've been doing, bringing you the other side of the story. I'm very fortunate today to be joined by someone, and it's perfect that you're joining me today because one of our stories that we're going to talk about right off the top, you're probably the most sort of apt journalist to be talking about. I think you've spent the most time on that story. Sid, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. And yeah, of course, we're talking about Sheila Annette Lewis. A tragic situation has unfolded, but I'm sure we'll get into that in a moment.
Yeah, let's go through some of the nuts and bolts, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking on this. There's a lot of sort of angles to consider in this. First and foremost, obviously, the human tragedy that has unfolded. But before we get into that, if you are watching us, you are very likely joining us on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, Getter, whichever one of those platforms you're joining us on. We are so happy to have you. Thank you for being here. Thanks to you for being part of this daily roundup. I'm just going to encourage you guys to consider shifting over to one of the platforms that doesn't censor free speech, that doesn't control what people say on their platform, but instead simply gives them a platform upon which they can share their perspectives. Rumble is one of those incredible platforms that enables that. The other thing that's nice with Rumble is there is something called a Rumble rant, and that's a way for you to engage with us, for us to have a conversation effectively together. You chip in a couple bucks, it helps us keep the lights on, helps us do this daily show, and we can actually engage with you. Unlike the big mainstream media outlets who only engage with their government handlers, we actually like talking to the people that we're working for and working on their behalf of as journalists. You can actually support us as well on locals.com. If you subscribe on locals.com, not only will you get all of our usual content, you'll get some special behind the scenes stuff as well. So on that note, let's get right to the news of the day, and that is that of Sheila Annette Lewis denied a transplant due to her vaccination status. This is heartbreaking. Sid, if you can take it away, you've covered the story like nobody else. Tell us, take people, for folks who aren't aware, sort of when you first heard about this story all the way through to now.
Well, first, I just want to say, of course, Sheila Annette Lewis has passed away. My condolences sincerely to her family. I can tell you, obviously, the journalistic aspect of the story, but of course, she's a woman, she's a Canadian like any of us. She has a story, she has children, she has grandchildren. I can't, tell you her whole story, but what I can tell you is the legal situation that she was faced with after her doctors, through Alberta Health Services contracted doctors, they had denied her a life-saving organ transplant, one that she needed to survive, and obviously, well, we hear about the news today. So what ended up happening was in 2019 she was diagnosed with a terminal condition, and she began the process of going through transplantation, or receiving, being on the list for an organ transplant. After that, the pandemic ensued, and she was therefore required to get the COVID-19 vaccine as prescribed by the contracted doctors, those who were leading the way for the transplant program. Unfortunately, this is not something Sheila Annette Lewis was able to do. There was concerns about her health, especially given her condition, and there's some stuff we can't talk about there because it was hidden by a publication ban. But they denied her nonetheless, and then legal proceedings ensued, and Sheila Annette Lewis, alongside the JCCF, brought a charter rights violation case against the AHS and the doctors involved. This case was brought all the way to the Supreme Court, who declined to hear the case, dismissed it, and sided with a lower judge who had basically dismissed Sheila's case. But the Supreme Court then added costs, so the legal fees for AHS were then something Sheila Annette Lewis would have to pay. Before the Supreme Court decision, though, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and Sheila Annette Lewis, they found out that she had already acquired natural immunity. She had COVID twice, meaning that she had a natural immunity protection to COVID, but still they wanted her to take the vaccine. And not only that, then they asked her to take the COVID vaccine booster atop the vaccine that she would have to take, and so too would her family have to take the boosters in order for her to get the shot. Then the Supreme Court dismissed her case, and then she brought forward new legal action against AHS and the doctors involved. This was brought forward through Umar Sheikh of Sheikh Law, and through this medical malpractice lawsuit, they came to what is described as a satisfactory agreement for all parties. It's confidential. We don't know exactly what the deal was what Sheila received there, but AHS, they came to the table. They submitted. They said, "Yeah, we're going to have to sign a deal here." And unfortunately, it was just too late. It's been already years of Sheila Annette Lewis facing this terminal condition while going through legal proceedings to try and fight for her right to have access. And only, near what's now the end of her life, did AHS come to the table and sign some kind of agreement. But of course, it was too late. And now, of course, our condolences to the family. It would be wrong of me not to tell you that there are more people out there that were in Sheila's situation that are facing terminal conditions and being denied organ transplants. There is one individual in Ontario who was taken from his family because he didn't take the vaccine and he needed a liver transplant to survive. Unfortunately, he passed away previously. There are an untold number of Canadians right now who are being denied these life-saving organ transplants because of their vaccination status. And it's not just a matter of being unvaccinated, as the AHS has proven. You have to be up to date with your COVID shots. And what are we finding out more and more every day is the health risks associated with those same vaccines. Positive and negative, I keep it YouTube safe, I guess, for the moment. Yeah, exactly. Garnet Harper, he's another one of these individuals. I can't tell you how many there are out there. Especially consider a couple, before Sheila Annette Lewis, there was an individual who reached out to me from Manitoba, suffering a similar situation where they required an organ transplant, but because of their vaccination status, they were being denied. And because obviously organs are a scarce resource, because there aren't that many doctors who can perform these surgeries, there's a very small group of assistants that these individuals can have. And if they do want to get that organ transplant and they go public about the fact that the doctors are saying, well, no, you can't, well, a large concern they have is, okay, well, maybe they're just going to get taken off entirely. And it's the very same person you're asking for this transplant who is denying you because of your vaccination status. Even if you then come to the table afterwards, you've already broken that trust, and this is a person who's supposed to perform a life-saving transplant. And let alone all the issues that arise, with the pandemic and all of the delays in surgeries that we've seen. There's just so much wrong with the healthcare system right now. It's truly incredible, and Sheila Annette Lewis is one of the latest victims of that, and it truly is a tragedy.
Yeah, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. The other sort of angle I wanted to touch on with this is you had an opportunity to sort of grill, at least ask a question to Premier Smith on this. And I think very often as of late, whether it's like on addictions or human trafficking or any of these other fronts, it tends to be good news. But on this front, I don't think necessarily enough was done. Would you agree?
Danielle Smith said that she would defer to the experts, and that's what she did. She deferred to the experts. The experts let the time run out for Sheila Annette Lewis and then finally said, okay, hold on a second. We've got to sign this medical malpractice lawsuit. We got to sign something here and make this go away. And that's exactly what they did, but it was too late. And Danielle Smith could have done something here, but she didn't. Whether or not, she says she defers to the experts, but she's the premier of Alberta. You're going to tell me that she can't do anything to save an Albertan's life? Well, that's a tragedy.
Yeah. Well, and I know I'm hoping this isn't the case, but she just got off a whole massive scandal based on the fact that she had sort of overstepped allegedly and spoken to Tyler Shandro about possible immunity for folks resulting from COVID-19. Then, as an extension of that, she might be concerned about overstepping. But frankly, I mean, the type of leadership we need is not leadership that is extremely concerned about overstepping and is willing to let somebody perhaps perish in the process while trying to play those games. So this is a spot where I think work had been done. Jason Kenney was also saying all the right things leading up to COVID-19, but then when the medical critical issue arose, suddenly he folded like a cheap tent. So this is going to be, I think, the litmus test. Danielle Smith has been very strong on a lot of issues, but all of a sudden it's evaporated. It's gone away.
Yeah, no, to say the least. And, let's not forget about the health ministers that are involved, right? They do have a responsibility in this too. I mean, they're here to protect Albertans and Albertan health. And of course, this isn't just an Alberta issue. This is a national issue. There needs to be something done. Politicians need to implement something or act in some kind of way instead of just, taking a back seat and letting Albertans die. The very Albertans who voted for them. And one thing, if I could, I just want to say we did actually, I was there in person. I was granted an opportunity to interview Sheila in person at her home. and her family member as well, one of her family members as well, her son Darcy. And if I could, I would encourage you guys to go back and watch those videos, especially right now the one with Darcy, because it's not just Sheila Annette Lewis and her family. Of course, right now they're living through the end result of this situation. But even in asking Premier Smith about this, when she said she would seek a second opinion about Sheila Annette Lewis's case, she said, oh, and she's aware of another individual who might be going through a similar situation. How many people out there are suffering through this? And many of them suffering silently because of, what I mentioned before, is because if they do speak out, well, there's that risk or that concern that they're no longer going to receive that treatment from the very same doctors who are denying them, because how do you get over that hurdle? It's a very difficult situation for anybody involved. And as Darcy said, her son, when I interviewed him, is, if you want to help, reach out. There's people that are in these situations right now that are going through this. You want to help those people who still have a chance. And of course, if people are, I'm sure would want to reach out to the Miss Lewis and her family, Miss Lewis's family, sorry, to provide them with assistance. And again, there's so many people out there that are being refused right now that need help. And if our politicians can do something about it, they should be.
Well, I mean, ultimately.
No, yeah, you're back. Sorry.
Yeah, and I do apologize to folks out there for the last couple streams. We have new equipment. It's literally just in the mail. We're getting a little bit of feedback here, and we're just trying to sort out. It didn't happen forever. Getting a little bit of it now, so I do apologize for any lack of quality in sound. New equipment is on the way, thanks to supporters like yourself. So thanks so much for that. Ultimately, here we'd just like to say, condolences to this family. This should not happen again. It cannot happen again. And hopefully, some of these politicians who did not do enough to ensure that Sheila Lewis received the care that she needed, are able to take corrective action and to make amends. This is very much an extension, despite the fact that there is some good news coming out of courts on COVID-19 and everything. This is an extension of so much of what we saw over the past couple years, where people were basically treated as second-class citizens because of their vaccination status. So heartbreaking stuff. Our sincerest condolences to the family. Folks out there, I'm sure we're probably going to have some of this information available. Sid wrote an article on this. If you have friends and family out there who maybe aren't aware of what people have really gone through, haven't been necessarily sympathetic to unvaccinated people in their plight, this is certainly a story that you can share with them, because it's heartbreaking. It really is.
No, to say the least. And, I do hope more people pay attention to this story, because it is ongoing. Sheila Annette Lewis has passed away, may she rest in peace. But there are other people out there suffering and waiting and hoping that they can get the transplants that they need to survive. These people, their time is running out for an untold number of Canadians right now through our tax-paid healthcare system. Sheila Annette Lewis was seeking this transplant internationally, because internationally there's a multitude, there's plenty of hospitals out there that don't require these same vaccine mandates for transplant, especially for someone who already had COVID and had natural immunity built up in her system. It boggles the mind that Canadians are seeking international support when all it takes is the signing of a piece of paper, and they'd be able to get that transplant here at home.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, and you see it time and time again. The fact is, within socialized medicine, you see less innovation. The same procedures continue while new procedures become available. People get left by the wayside. You'll have progressives criticizing the American healthcare system because of gaps in insurance, for example, or things like that. But people suffer here as a consequence of both the inefficacies as well as the lack of sort of advancement within technology. But this is a heartbreaking case. I want to show you just a tweet that was released, I think, effectively just right after Sheila Annette Lewis lost her life. Let's go to this Liberal Party tweet now. This is absurd. Every Canadian deserves access to health care they need when they need it. How do you put this out right as this tragedy is unfolding? That's where we're investing to help strengthen our public healthcare system. They're saying every Canadian deserves access. So what are they saying? The unvaccinated aren't Canadian? I don't even care about the rest of the tweet. Yeah, it's going to say generic healthcare stuff. That's never going to happen. Every politician has promised forever. That is the Liberal Party attitude, and that is why they're probably not going to win the next election. By contrast, Roman Baber, the former, I'm forgetting now, is it Baber? I always get those wrong. The former leadership hopeful, Said the Canadian Health Act forbids discrimination, but Sheila Lewis was denied transplant because of lawful medical choice. Her death is tragic failure of medical ethics and the administration of justice. I'll work to right this wrong until the last day of my career. Rip Sheila. That is quite the juxtaposition, isn't it?
Yeah, and I hope Roman Barbara sticks to that. Speaking of the Liberal Party and that tweet of theirs, I remember recently Rachel Notley, the leader of the NDP here in Alberta, mentioned something along those lines as well in a tweet. We need access to healthcare for everybody or people. Albertans shouldn't have to go elsewhere for their healthcare needs or something like that. And I responded to her on Twitter and was like, hey, what about Sheila Annette Lewis? She needs healthcare. She's not able to receive it at home. And Rachel Notley blocked me on Twitter. That's the kind of mentality they have. I expect nothing less from the Liberal Party. They are so blind to what people are going through right now. It's like when you see horses that have the blinders on. That's what this tweet is. They're looking at a specific group of people that is an imaginary minority sympathetic or group that requires sympathy, and they're advocating towards that. It has nothing. Oh yeah, there it is. And she blocked me for that. They do not care. They'll say what sounds nice, but realistically, they don't care. They let people die every day. So I see nothing when they post that.
Yeah, heartbreaking stuff. We're going to jump to a quick ad break now, and we'll get into some more story, a little bit more positive news coming out of Alberta. Not perfect, but positive. But a quick ad break.
Have you seen our new documentary, Church Under Fire, Canada's War on Christianity yet? Well, if you haven't, you have not missed your chance. The documentary details the trials and persecutions of the pastors and congregations who stood up to the lockdowns when COVID restrictions came to their churches. We have taken the documentary across the country to bring it to the people who lived the stories we tell inside of it. But we're not done yet. We've just added new showings in Alberta. To get details and showtimes, please go to churchunderfiremovie.com, but I'll give you a few right now. We've got a showing in Lethbridge on August 23rd, one in Red Deer on August 24th, Edmonton, August 25th, Mirror, Alberta, that's drive-in movie, August 26th, and Westlock, Alberta, August 27th. If you are someone or you know someone interested in hosting a Rebel screening of Church Under Fire, you can contact us. The information is at that same website, churchunderfiremovie.com.
Justin Trudeau's new censorship law, Bill C-18. It's a shakedown and a desperate attempt to keep the mainstream media afloat. Many have already lost their ability to access our Facebook and Instagram pages. The blackout will soon affect every user in Canada. We've partnered with Private Internet Access, a VPN provider dedicated to safeguarding digital privacy. For just $2 a month, you can maintain your access to our content across all your devices at piavpn.com/rebelnews.
Well, welcome back, folks. Before we get into this good news coming out of some Alberta courts, we're going to take a look at a couple articles here. First off, public health COVID modeling used to justify lockdowns was drastically wrong, as no surprise to everyone. Nearly 90% of Canadians responded. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. Yeah, please keep going, and I'll pitch something after.
Sure. Nearly 90% of Canadians responded that they had suspected to have contracted COVID but were not sick. So sick that they needed to consult with a doctor, according to Public Health Agency of Canada internal reporting. At least 45% of Canadians contracted COVID, far higher than the modeling used to impose lockdowns, vaccine passports, and gathering restrictions. Analysis of the report, use of public health measures, advice, and risk assessment that was first published by Blacklock's reporter Thursday morning. The government used modeling suggesting 10% COVID contraction rate in the populace would necessitate lockdowns to avoid catastrophic outcomes in the healthcare system. So they estimated about 10%. It was coming in at about 45%. Very interesting to see how similar, despite all of our lockdown metrics and everything, the numbers actually wound up being, as far as contraction, maybe not outcomes, to countries like Sweden that didn't see their economies affected and effectively stayed open throughout most of COVID. But what do you make of this, Sid?
Well, it just makes me think of an interview you did recently with the JCCF. Please remind me of the specific individuals. But it was about a decision that was recently made in the courts suggesting in Alberta where some of the decision making was coming from. Adam, can you fill me in a little bit on that? Because this is what the story reminds me of.
Yeah, well, and I think this is the question: is where is the decision making coming from? And one of the sort of downsides, and we're going to talk about this soon, but with the court proceedings that are largely now being acquitted as a result of the Ingram decision, which we'll get to, we're not going to get the full sort of exposure, the full analysis of what happened, because most of these cases are quite simply just going by the wayside. So there was a lot of, and I'm sure you saw this as well, monkey see, monkey do during COVID. So Ontario would do something, or BC would do something, Alberta would simply follow suit. There wasn't a lot of evidence. When pressed to present evidence, and this is part of the reason the Ingram ruling went the way it did, which I'll define the Ingram ruling shortly, fear not. But it was that politicians were effectively pressuring health officials to make decisions based on political consensus, not on evidence. So there isn't a lot of evidence. There seem to be people saying things, making random opinions. Sure, they might have been medical experts, but time and time again, we've seen that those outcomes were significantly wrong. It seemed like it was just kind of, oh, this is what they're saying, so we're going to run off that. And then if you asked who originally started the rumor, they really couldn't point their finger in any particular direction. There was a shocking lack of evidence in courts for why these decisions were made, and I think we all could have predicted this, that this was going to occur. But it's good to see everything sort of coming to fruition. There's a lot of "I told you so's" rolling out. One thing that I did find interesting, and this is this next article. This is, I don't know if this is a shift or what's happening here, but the CBC article, this is the first time I think I've heard the CBC say this. Want a COVID-19 booster? Experts say most Canadians should wait for updated shots. Have you heard the CBC give any sort of hold up, pause, wait throughout all of this when it comes to vaccination?
Yeah, no, this is a rare thing, but maybe it's just a matter of they want to get the 2.0 version to people instead of the old version. The old version had some kinks, this and that. Not to say that those kinks were positive or negative, let's say.
Yes.
But I'm sure there's an updated version. Yeah. They would love to indulge in.
And we already bought all the old ones. We have 400 million of those sitting around. You have to get the new one because it's better. So yeah, anyways, that is certainly interesting. But let's get into some of this Ingram talk. We can't spend too much time on that other stuff on YouTube, I'm afraid. So for those out there who are unaware, the Ingram ruling was an individual, a gym owner and a group of other individuals effectively challenging the governments on a number of grounds. They basically threw the book at the government saying, you've infringed this right, that right, everything. Most of what you've probably complained about as far as your rights being infringed over vaccination status and through COVID restrictions, whatever it may be, that was within this case. Now, interestingly, the court actually acknowledged that there were some effective tramplings of fundamental freedoms that did take place, but they actually said that was covered under the notwithstanding clause, and this is where some people are concerned. So they basically said that was all actually fine. It was okay that they trampled your freedoms based on this, but what they did say is that politicians were sort of overstepping and overreaching and influencing the decisions of the medical doctor, the chief medical officer of health, Dina Hinshaw, and that's what the problem was. That was a violation of the Health Act. Now, the concern there is a ruling basically said it was fine that they trampled your rights, despite not having a lot of good evidence. That should be concerning to folks. And they're saying it would have been better if an unelected official was making the decisions without any political influence or insight whatsoever. They're saying that's their principal concern. So I understand people out there being concerned about this. I actually just had the opportunity to sit down with Chad Williamson yesterday. That report should be out later today, likely. We had a good turn into a 20-minute talk because we spent quite a bit of time breaking down the concerns by an extension of this, because I know lots of people out there were saying this isn't really a win. I have to say, though, despite those concerns, in practice, a win is a win, because we are seeing acquittals of people who've been caught up in legal battles and facing serious prosecution just rolling out now. So we saw Pastor James Coates and Pastor Tim Stevens effectively having their charges just dropped entirely now. So they are effectively in the clear as far as my understanding. I'm going to be speaking with Tim Stevens very soon about his story. And we're expecting, it's not official yet. So typically you don't want to report on this until it's done, but we are expecting for on Monday for Chris Scott of the Whistle Stop acquittal there. In addition to the Langlois of Mum's Diner, which I believe in Red Deer, they're expecting acquittal sometime in September. So there is a massive win here categorically in terms of these charges being dropped. The other sort of concern here is with acquittals, like we talked about a little bit earlier, you're not going to get the full sort of exposure of what happened, some of the internal emails. Chad Williamson and I of Williamson Law, you're going to want to watch that interview because there was like jokes about don't mention that this is political within emails that were going to be revealed within the courts that are not quite there yet. One quick thing before I ask you to weigh in on this, Sid, and this is massive, so I wanted to point this out on stream. Chad Williamson of Williamson Law, he had 150 cases along with his colleague, criminal lawyer Yoav Niv. They had 150 fight the fines cases. I'm going to give you a guess as to how many people actually were charged when all was said and done out of 150.
Tell me.
0. 150 and 0. That is how bad this was. There are wins taking place. We also talked about it in that interview, and I'll give you a chance to go check it out once it's out to get the full scoop. Is there going to be remuneration, rather? Is there going to be sort of compensation for these folks? Will there be civil lawsuits coming up? Because for lots of people, this battle is far from over. At this point, they're saying, you know what, I've been vindicated, but now I want justice. Sid, what do you make of all the good news?
Well, Adam, I wasn't sure that we were going to, get this far into, the impacts of the Ingram decision, I believe it's called, right? However, I'm sorry to say, where was the amnesty? This could have all been done already. But, what did it take? It took hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal fees. And as you mentioned, Williamson Law, they do amazing work. Williamson Law, I can't praise them enough. They're also on the Coots case as well, helping many individuals who've been affected by that, charges and tickets stemming from there as well. Those guys are rock solid. And I'm sure they're using this recent decision as far as they possibly can to help all of these clients out. This could have been solved already, and it wasn't. It took a pile of court proceedings to get this far. Adam, that's kind of my take on it. How do you feel about this?
Well, yes, that's it dead on. The amount of, you look at the court dollars, the resources, and Chad and I talk about this, while other things are struggling, you could have invested in, say, healthcare that could have saved Sheila Annette Lewis's life, for example. But instead, you've got all these courts tied up. Real criminals were basically getting caught and released. Now that is changing, at least it seems. They seem to be addressing that. But it's significant what is happening here, for sure. And it shouldn't have. We all know that. We've seen it this entire time. We could have told you that these laws were unlawful, not for the reason the court said, but for the real reason that they trampled people's rights. Danielle Smith was right in saying that this is wrong and that these people should probably receive amnesty, that there should be some sort of immunity. Unfortunately, whether it be Alberta Health Services, whether it be the courts, whatever it may be, we saw the massive backlash that Danielle Smith encountered for even asking a couple questions about this. Now, most of that backlash was from fake news from the CBC that they've effectively borderline apologized for, but they were sharing false information. But this never should have happened.
Yeah, no, it never should have happened in the first place. But there's also, didn't they say that they weren't going to disclose Smith's UCP? Didn't they say they were not going to disclose some of the COVID decision making that they had decided upon, or that the previous government had decided upon before she got into office? I'm trying to remember the specific headline there. But as maybe the guys think about that one. There's also Jesse Johnson from Without Papers Pizza. I previously had a conversation with Chad Williamson about that case as well, that they're helping him fight on. Jesse Johnson, his restaurant was shut down because of the COVID vaccine passport bylaw. He just wanted to treat people as equals when they entered his restaurant. He wasn't checking for the vaccination status. That's not what he wanted to do. And they shut him down. He got a mountain of tickets as well. And is he going to get his restaurant back? I mean, there's real damage that's been done. Again, we've talked about suicides. There's people who've passed away now, like Sheila Annette Lewis. There's real damage that's been done. And what's going to come out of it at the end of the day? Are we going to have to face this again the next time, the so-called pandemic comes around? As, people are worried there might be one this fall or next fall or whatever it may be. Are we going to have to deal with that again? That's the question at the end of the day.
And that is exactly, and we talked about that, is just how safeguarded are your rights. When the government tramples them, it goes through the court proceedings. The courts are like, well, they were trampled, but it's fine given what happened. Even with all the new information, talking with John Carpe in the first week or two when they realized COVID was dangerous, John Carpe was like, there is sort of a metric. If a government suspects that there is likely to be a massive pandemic, there is a valid sort of notwithstanding to say, listen, we really need to save lives. But that would have been if 2 weeks to flatten the curve was a real thing. We saw what 2 weeks to flatten the curve is. It turned into 2 years to flatten fundamental rights and freedoms in Canada. And that is the major shift that has taken place here. And I think that, and as you mentioned before, everyone knew that this was happening, and I hope people are awake enough to know that if they allow it to happen, it'll probably happen again. There is a major concern, though, with this ruling and with what we've seen over the past couple of years, that if there's a new variant and things get bad and restrictions have to come back in, it seems like the courts are going to side with, under any circumstance, it's okay to violate your rights, even if the evidence doesn't pan out or there's very little evidence to present. So certainly troubling. Who knows? We really won't know until we see it again. I, for one, hope, and I know Chad shared the sentiment as well, that there is significant, and it's difficult to take a court or take a government to court, AHS, whatever it be, an institution, over these matters. Very often the courts like to defend their interests and defend their governments, but I'm hoping that there is massive civil action and there are liabilities in place so that a government learns, perhaps at the cost of their bottom dollar, that you cannot trample Canadians' rights. Certainly people can speak out in the polls. I think if we look at the last leadership race, and this is where this will be a test for Danielle Smith, if she caves on COVID restrictions and allows COVID restrictions back in, and I'm not saying, let's say there is another variant, and she comes out and says, listen, if you want to wear masks and kind of stay away from people, giving advice like that, I think it's okay for a government to do that. The second that I have a problem with that, I don't necessarily agree with it all, but the second I have a problem is when it's mandated, forced, people's lives are alternatively effective. If she ever crosses that line, we're going to have Jason Kenney 2.0. So I'm hoping that is not the case, because on some other issues, not all other issues, she hasn't folded like a cheap tent. So I'm hoping she's more like a yurt than a cheap tent. That's what we're hoping for here. What do you think, though? What's your sort of instinct? I've had the opportunity to cover more of the stories where she has been good and has stood up. You've covered some of these more heartbreaking stories, particularly Sheila Annette Lewis, where she hasn't taken that stand. So what's your perspective on that?
It's difficult to say the least. One thing I can say, though, is across many platforms or areas of conversation, someone like Danielle Smith, she likes to please everybody in a sense, and that can be good, that can also be bad. As she mentioned, she'll defer to the experts with the case of Sheila Annette Lewis. She didn't please everybody in that scenario, I can tell you. However, she does aim to do something at least. Whereas Trudeau or Rachel Notley, it's just pure silence. It's pure silence. It's you petty, insignificant, immoral, runt that just goes running around destructing my way. Or obstructing my way. That's the kind of feeling that you get off of those people. I can't speak, 100% to Danielle Smith and her true character. I think that's simply just a matter of time that will show. Especially because it's not just her, it's her and the people that she's surrounded with. And I'm sure a lot of these people, how many of these people are from the UCP that have been in the UCP for I would say decades perhaps, but maybe not that long. There's a kind of an in-house understanding that gets acquired and passed on, and whether she'll break the bonds of some of the preconceived notions of her cohorts or whatnot, we shall see.
Yeah. On that note, we do have a video actually of Danielle Smith, and a bunch of progressives are having a hoot with this. I, for one, think it's a good thing, and there's not much to criticize. But let's play this clip of Danielle Smith saying we don't need a just transition in Alberta because we don't intend to transition away from oil and natural gas. A sentiment I think most of the people watching today can agree with. But let's play that clip if we have it ready.
We don't need a just transition in Alberta because we don't intend to transition away from oil and natural gas. As many of you in the industry have pointed out, the transition we're talking about is a transition away from emissions. It's not a transition away from production.
Yeah, there you go. So for folks on Rumble, I think we may have cut away from you from a second. I think we're investigating. I think it was a technical issue on their end. I do believe that we are back. But that is the Danielle Smith that we need, that sort of unapologetic. Listen, and Danielle Smith, I've questioned her quite a few times about using language like net zero. I'm like, why are you even talking like this? And she's like, well, the industry is talking about it, so I'm not going to tell them no. But I, for one, don't have a problem with saying if people want to buy renewable, we'll sell them renewable. We're happy to make money off of that. But the fact that she just comes out deadpan and says, we're not transitioning. If Alberta goes completely renewable, let's say, we should still be getting oil out of the ground, making money off of it, and selling it to countries that have lower environmental and human standards, like the human rights standards. The most important and sort of responsible thing Canada can do for the world is export our responsible natural resources. And that, at least on that front, seems that there's no apologies coming, there's no retractions coming. That clip, to me, and probably to most of the folks here, that is a good Danielle Smith clip, despite progressives sharing that as though it's some sort of bad news and we should be ashamed of not transitioning. What do you think on that front, Sid?
Well, it is interesting. I see her perspective as one that comes from the industry or the Alberta stance of getting a product to market, basically. However, in the process of doing so, she is kind of, I don't know if this is the right word to use, but submitting herself to the 2050 agenda, the 2035 agenda. The world, decision, or the world body has decided that these are the environmental targets we have to hit by X and Y day to save the planet. Is there a questioning of the science here? I don't think so. I think this is just okay, we agree with the mission, we understand its need for the world to transition away from this and that. We're just not going to do the just Trudeau transition. We're going to take it on by our own means and find a way that's more practical, which may or may not be a good thing. But at the end of the day, it is still the same road in a sense is being taken.
Yeah, well, and I know I said that, like, we were talking with, I did an interview as well with Rebecca Schultz, the Minister of Environment, rather, in protected areas. And I said, like, probably most of our viewers don't care about net zero rhetoric. What they care about is, are you going to attack our jobs? And I think as long as they preserve that sentiment, that's okay. And part of the place that we're seeing this is likely actually in practice is on this moratorium on renewable energy sectors. So for folks who aren't aware out there, there is effectively a 6-month pause right now on projects taking place. And what that does, this is projects over 1 megawatt. So whether it be solar or wind, they're pausing those right now, just a pause. So that they can have reclamation and territory plans in place. The NDP loves to scream and shout about the lack of capacity and planning to clean up oil sites and how the government's having to invest money now. And the government is saying, oh yeah, well, we're going to have the same problem with solar panels in years. So everyone from Danielle Smith to Jyoti Gondek is in agreement that they have to pause and have a plan in place here. But this is the latest thing that the NDP is screaming about. We do have one more clip of Danielle Smith, though. I want to do that, and then we can get into the NDP reaction to that 6-month moratorium. But let's jump to the one additional clip we have of Danielle Smith first.
The technologies that will provide fundamental change in the future are technologies that will provide the world with miracles of cheap and abundant energy, all while reducing carbon emissions. And those technologies will come from the minds of innovators right here in Alberta. And they will spring from here because of our geology, because of our energy industry know-how, and because of our commitment to carrying out energy exploration and development better than anyone else. This is the story of Alberta's past and present and future. Alberta is in a race to develop these game-changing technologies. We're competing with Texas and Colorado and Norway. And we will win that race so long as we are not hobbled by the ongoing poor policy decisions coming from our federal government. We don't need a just transition in Alberta because we don't intend to transition away from oil and natural gas. As many of you in the industry have pointed out, the transition we're talking about is a transition away from emissions. It's not a transition away from production. We believe industry has started down a path of reducing their emissions while exporting more oil and delivering more LNG. I often try to tell my counterparts in Ottawa that out of a barrel of oil, I believe you've now been able to produce something like 6,000 different materials, ranging from lubricants and petrochemicals all the way onward to asphalt and other building materials. And that, to me, is going to be the future. That is why I have so much confidence that as we reduce emissions, we are going to be able to increase our ability to have an imprint in the world.
Yeah, there does seem to be a little bit of that like kowtowing to the terminology out there, but it feels like apologetics to me where, and I don't mean apologetics isn't apologizing, it's like playing the game and defending a position. But there's nothing wrong with reducing pollution. I just don't want to, and I mean, we're talking about if we're going to reduce pollution, let's talk about like the massive sewer waste directly into oceans that you can see coming out of some coastal progressive cities in this country. But if we're able to produce more stuff and put out less emissions and have cleaner air, that's all positive. I don't think anyone is necessarily opposed to that. So that it is a fine line, though. It is a bit of a balancing act between playing into their games and feeding their rhetoric and this. But the Alberta government has rejected a federal emissions cap, which would limit our capacity to output resources. They have said that they will not comply with 2035. And one thing that would be kind of funny, and I couldn't care less about these sort of carbon emissions caps, to be perfectly honest, but if we were able to see our economy grow, if we were to both see oil and gas and renewables increase, if we were to export more energy as a province, and if we were to do it all at under net zero before the federal government could do that, wouldn't that just be the best? Albertans who aren't particularly concerned, just as an aside, happen to be able to do this. I don't think it should ever happen at the expense of jobs, at the expense of industries, any of these other things. But if there is technological advancements that allow us to pollute less and create more, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's where Danielle Smith is trying to come at this from. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being too optimistic with that. It is the language of the World Economic Forum that is here anyways.
Well, let me just say, recently I saw some news that there's, those paper straws that, we know and love because they replaced the plastic ones, more environmentally friendly.
It's coming. It's one of our stories.
Yeah, exactly. The paper straws that they used because they're more environmentally friendly, they implemented this, to save the planet. It turns out they've got a bunch of toxic chemicals in them. So, congratulations. Yeah. That paper straw that's been decomposing, that's been what would you call it? Not evaporating. Decomposing, thank you very much, into your Tim Hortons iced cappuccino or whatever it may be. It's decomposing toxic chemicals into your body. Great job,
Yeah.
And that's the benefit of the environmental movement, is they're willing to, take on issues that aren't really issues and end up doing more damage to everybody. Like, this is the playbook at this point. So am I surprised? Not really, but I'm glad we could do a little public service announcement here to make sure people know that you're not saving the environment. You're literally just killing yourself when you drink out of a paper straw.
Progressives taking on issues that aren't issues, one issue at a time. That's funny. And I mean, we've talked about this before, but you and Daniel Smith touched on it in that video, the petroleum byproducts. It's like everyone not long ago, even environmentalists were like heralding, these magical byproducts that like, we're not wasting any part of this process. If we can't use it for fuel, we can use it for plastics. The kayaks that the hippies paddle up to protest oil rigs on are made out of petroleum byproducts. Like, the product is there. We were just switching away from paper bags to plastics because we had them anyways. We didn't have to cut down trees. Now we're switching back. We're jumping all over the place. But yeah, I've been I don't think anyone who has like these paper straws that fall apart cares in any way, shape, or form about the quality of their food, because it tastes awful. It makes everything taste absolutely dreadful. You can get a deluxe fancy cappuccino, whatever the heck you want to call it. You put one of these straws into it, it tastes like you're drinking it through a newspaper. It's absolutely terrible.
Look, honestly, and we can hop on after this, but when they introduced these paper straws, Tim Hortons, look, they're not the best, they're not good, but I do every once in a while have enjoyed the iced cappuccinos. I think as most Canadians have, it's a very common thing around here. When they introduced the paper straws, I simply stopped buying iced cappuccinos. That drink I used to love, even though it was horrible for me. I just simply stopped drinking it because of the paper straw. And this reminds me too, in order to save the planet or whatever the reason was, they changed the lids on their coffee cups. I know this is a small, whatever issue, but they made it less productive. It made it drip more on your mouth. It was just worse. People were complaining about it, but they simply don't care. They implement things that are worse simply because it's better for the environment or it'll save your life in the long term.
And this is famously, I generally don't drink Tim's. I worked there for years, but I generally don't drink it because of their anti-oil position. Occasionally, if it's the only thing in a small town, whatever. But you look at, as they bring in more and more fancy drinks, they're anti-oil, but they're getting more and more plastic cups. So they're moving away from straws, but they're bringing in more entire plastic cups.
Yeah, no, they don't want you to use plastic forks or plastic straws, but they want you to basically eat a bile of oil. Like that's most food agencies, right, they're implementing these.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to fly through a whole bunch of articles right now because we've got so much to get to, and we do need to get to at least one more ad break. But I do want to touch on this. I think we touched on this last time we talked, but Nagwan Alganid, a MLA here in Alberta, has shared this study basically revealing that they suspect 33 billion will be lost as a result of this 6-month pause, 24,000 jobs, and 118 projects. Now, this independent, quote-unquote, think tank that put this out, 33 billion. I mean, first of all, the NDP saying anything about jobs. I asked Rebecca Schultz about the jobs and the costs and what could potentially happen, because this is a valid concern. But this is a government that couldn't care less when hundreds and thousands of people lose their oil jobs. They seem to rejoice at those industries shutting down. So they don't get to say anything about all these jobs. The other thing, too, is this is a 6-month pause. It doesn't affect any existing contracts, and these projects can get rolling once there is a groundwork in place. So the suggestion that this is all completely shot in the foot is gone. Apparently, 23,000 of those jobs, I was reading somewhere, are like projected temporary construction jobs. No, those are still jobs. I'm not subtracting that, but they're taking the most exaggerative language. And there's been estimations that the 2035 agenda that the NDP would love would have a total $1.7 trillion cost, with hundreds of billions potentially coming out of Alberta. So they're going to pretend to be concerned about this one niche incident with a minor pause, and then they're celebrating absolutely everything else. She also shared this tweet by Asad Razzouk, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and they're citing California, the place that just had effectively rolling brownouts and you couldn't charge your Tesla, as a place that is on track to 100% renewables and zero carbon by 2045. So California can do 2045, China can do 2060, Alberta has to do 2035 but if you look at this, solar has gone up, but everything else is effectively plateaued if you're looking at the numbers here. So this utility level solar has gone up. That is specifically the type of technology where if it's not sunny, your grid basically goes down dramatically and you don't have enough power. Unlike California, which parts of California can get cold, but we need reliable energy during our winters quite simply to survive. And they're saying, look at this warm place that has rolling brownouts and people can't charge their cars. We should be more like them. This is their mentality. They look at the laws and the energy policies of a place like California, a place that people are fleeing from rather, to Texas and everywhere else. And they're saying we should be more like that. That is the mentality of the NDP, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, they'll look to a place that has homeless cities all over. Like, I think even worse than Canada, of course, would be California and the homeless situations that are being dealt with there. And they look to that and be like, yeah, that's what we want. Yeah. That's what we need right there. Is all those homeless. They see they're not using the power grid. These smart homeless people are trying to save the planet because they're not on the power grid. That I'm sure you push that ball far enough down the road, that's what they're going to say to you. That's the insanity of it. People need energy to survive. That's the bottom line, and that's something Smith did address. She is aimed at providing more energy for more people around the world, and this does provide very useful things. Imagine if you had free electricity versus no electricity. Well, that is a world of difference, and that's what she's trying to provide for people around the world. What do these people people doing? Yeah, you implement your solar facilities, right? And there's, if anybody's seen the movie, I'm sure a lot of people have by now, was it Planet of the Humans? And you see the real destruction that's caused by these environmental initiatives. And you see the decay and the destruction that is left behind, let alone the slave labor issues and where they're getting all of these rare materials from. It's just a whole crazy can of worms, and either they don't realize this or they don't care.
Yeah, it's surreal. In other news, just because we do have to rip along, two more stories here, and then we're going to do a quick ad break. Then we're going to cover everything else we've got on the docket. A forest lawn, which is an area in Calgary for folks who aren't aware, a little bit of a rougher communities in some areas. Encampment cleared, but bigger problems suggest fix only temporary. We don't even have to get into this article too much, but how often we used to see, like, oh yeah, in LA there's these encampments, it's crazy. Almost every major city, and even relatively small cities, whether it be Kelowna or whatever it is, there's like encampments setting up everywhere that we simply didn't see. This is the new Canada under Justin Trudeau, and it's literally like, since he's been in power, these things have become commonplace. Life is simply unaffordable.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing is you've seen the loss of, well, you've seen the increase of stuff like this, let's say, since the beginning of Trudeau's time in office. And it's been a while now. The situation keeps getting worse. He keeps creating people that he advocates for while implementing policies that hurt the very people he's pretending to save. And this has just gone on and on. And, you know, every day we mention it, and the polls are showing more and more now, people see Trudeau as his time is over. He's no longer, you know, going to be the leader of the Liberal Party. He's no longer going to be the prime minister, and it is only a matter of time. Every day, more and more people realize that, and I'm glad for that.
Yeah. It's good also to see the general sentiment as the shift away from Trudeau takes place, the shift away from progressive type policies like decriminalization, being soft on crime, all that stuff that the Alberta government and the Saskatchewan government and other places have started to reject, is spreading. And now even British Columbia, one of the places that's been one of the safe havens for decriminalization and free safe, quote unquote, injections, free drug supply, all that stuff. Polling now indicates from our own Alex Dhaliwal, who wrote up this article, that decriminalization of hard drugs is unpopular with British Columbians. So we're even seeing with this province that is among the most progressive and still has vaccine mandates and restrictions in place to some extent in some areas. When I was in BC, you see more masks there and in Toronto than just about anywhere else. But even they're saying, no, we don't need to decriminalize drugs. So that is a shift, I think, in the right direction for that province that has seen a lot of problems. They're sort of they're in crisis mode. All of Canada is when it comes to hard drugs, but they are especially. Let's jump to an ad break really, really quickly now, and then we'll get back and finish all the rest of these stories.
Do you want to start feeling like your pre-COVID self again? You're not alone. The wellness company's Spike Support Formula is an all-natural supplement to help people do just that. It was created by cardiologist Peter McCullough and his expert team of doctors to help the people experiencing effects from COVID and the you-know-what. Go to twccanada.health/rebel today.
And welcome back. So I found this article interesting. It's two articles from CBC that are saying hold off on vaccines, and now one saying that there's been circumstances like this in Kelowna before. Now, looking at the number of hectares burned, this year is one of the worst years on record. The last year that was even comparable, and it wasn't quite as bad per hectares. Number of fires, different story, but was 1989. But this fire, so there is a pattern of sort of bad fires occurring occasionally. But this speaks to the fact that there hasn't been an adequate response from the government. Despite these fires, there's been cutting of funding, everything. And this article effectively dives into that there's the eerily similar fires 20 years apart. And despite recommendations and advice and steps that could have been taken to potentially alleviate and reduce this circumstance, the government was unable to act. But Sid, how surprised are you to hear that the government came up short in responding to a serious need that could have potentially saved millions, if not billions of dollars of property damage?
Well, you say the government came up short. That's a little redundant. I think they always come up short, especially in this scenario. I mean, and you see Trudeau, complaining to about Facebook and them blocking news outlets for the reporting on these wildfires and stuff like that, when he himself could snap his finger, make that go away, and say, okay, Facebook, don't worry about it. We've solved the problem. Media outlets can now post in full what's going on. So even these little things, like they actually care about the situation at hand? Are they actually willing to do something about it? Are they willing to spend the dollars? No. No, they're absolutely not. And the other thing is there's, I guess the debate about are these wildfires intentionally being lit in some cases, and in most cases, maybe perhaps just natural wildfires. And that's the other thing to remember is that wildfires are a thing that happens. It's not like they're, out of the blue. There are preparatory needs that need to be taken care of. And if these people aren't getting enough of that or enough of that that support before these fires take hectares and hectares of land away from them, well, something needs to be done to help these people before it gets to that point.
Yeah. Now, on that note, we obviously saw, I think, 4 people around Northwest Territories did receive arson charges now. And I mean, this is happening around the world, and there's unprecedented fires. And there seems to be, whether it was the churches that we saw or these wildfires that are starting, in some instances, there are clear evidence for arson. Greece has experienced wildfires as well, and a minister there has called out arsonist scum. 79 people arrested with arson. At a certain point, something you notice starts to become a pattern, and when you're seeing sort of unprecedented mass arrests for arsons, unprecedented fires sort of corresponding with them, and it's not just forest fires, it's churches, everything like that. There seems to be a clearly politically motivated string of arson going on right across the world right now. So that is something that needs to be addressed. One thing I find incredibly interesting is how mainstream media isn't reporting on some of these arson cases being made. Often the mainstream media outlets who are touting all of this and very quick to rush out headlines about how this is global warming created, they skip the part about, oh, and by the way, there was 4 arsonists arrested in the area right before these fires emerged. So there is something there that needs to be explored. We do, I believe, have folks headed to Kelowna to look into that. We had the team on the ground in Maui as well. So we're there talking to people, getting the other side of the story, learning more about this so that information is available. And we're doing our very best to get those facts out there, because I think it really does matter. There needs to be investigation. I know in Alberta there is a lot of investigations into unknown sort of fire causes with arson being suspected. So it'll be interesting to see as this sort of fire season wraps up, as investigations unfold, just how, like, the statistical shift and how many of these are caused by arson instead of wildfire. We don't want to speculate exactly because we don't know, but once those facts come out, they'll be very telling. Now, if you're upset that Justin Trudeau isn't doing very well in the polls, which if you're watching this, that's probably not the case, but maybe you have a friend or family member, I suggest you go out now and grab a box of Kleenex where you can, because Kleenex is pulling out of Canada. The tissues you use to comfort each other will no longer be available. And this story in and of itself isn't necessarily the story, but it's the fact, under Justin Trudeau, like, Target is pulling out, and Delicio is pulling out, and Kleenex is pulling out, and all these companies are pulling out of Canada. For a while there, I remember when I was growing up, like, the United States had a lot of stuff Canada didn't have, and then it sort of all came here. And then Justin Trudeau was elected, and it all sort of started going away. How much of this do you think is just an extension of the fact that the economy, the environment that this government has created, plus all the legislation, the red tape, the bureaucracy, is not sort of welcoming to businesses?
Well, I can sum it up, and there's with one interview I saw, which was a man who was an immigrant, I believe, from Central America, and they asked, what was the biggest mistake you made in your life, and he said, coming to Canada. And yeah, a lot of people are feeling that sentiment now, especially over the last few years with Justin Trudeau. It's just been getting worse and worse and worse. It's a money grab. It's a trap for everyday people around the world to come to Canada, live this fantasy life, and let Justin Trudeau's government basically suck up all your money through taxes. It's the state of affairs in Canada is absolutely atrocious, and much like we're seeing companies pull out of providing their products here in Canada, so too are, I think, a lot of immigrants and people from around the world. They're looking at Canada being like, hey, it's not what it used to be, and that's pretty much all because of Trudeau.
Well, there's been articles lately about folks going back to Ukraine because everything's too expensive here and they can't afford to stay here. A country currently in a state of war, they're like, well, I can't afford to stay. I can't afford a place in Toronto or Vancouver. I need to go back home just to get by. I mean, if that's what you're going through, imagine what Canadians who this is their home are going through, and they don't have a place to simply flee to. So that's, and I mean, imagine fleeing to a war-torn country as your alternative being better than staying in Toronto or Vancouver. That says something in and of itself.
Imagine being a federal government and hearing news like that immigrants from Ukraine are coming to Canada and then deciding to leave because they don't want to be here anymore. Well, your federal government did not take the necessary steps required. I mean, they shouldn't have come here in the first place if they were just going to leave, if they saw that the situation back home was better. Could the federal government not have foreseen that situation happening? How many people are traveling through Canada because they thought it was something it wasn't?
Yeah, no, 100%. And you hear that time and time again. It isn't just people from Ukraine. It's people from other countries where you think Canada would be significantly better. But no, once they get here, the reality is different from what they have been sold. The Liberal government is kind of like a bad salesman. They increase their numbers. They're bringing lots of people in. But then most of these sales on the idea of Canada, they're turning into returns, which isn't good for business. So the numbers they put out there, I'd like to see the return numbers on those sales of the Canadian dream. We'll touch on a couple more things briefly as the time wraps up, and then we'll get to our chat here. But Trump was booked in Georgia on charges that he tried to overturn the state's 2020 election results. For me, we could talk about this for hours, but for me, in a nutshell, you look at some of what the other politicians have done, whether it be in the Biden family, whether it be Hillary Clinton herself. By the way, I'm in great mental health as I say that, so everyone has a record of that. But if you look at what they've done and what they've gotten away with by comparison, I've seen everyone on social media saying if this sort of follows through, they're making him effectively into a political martyr. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I think they are turning him into a political martyr. And you know, the one thing I would say though, when it comes to Donald Trump, yeah, he's probably one of the better candidates out there in the field right now. However, the lockdowns, the vaccines were brought forward by Donald Trump, basically applying pressure, allegedly, you know, to the big pharmaceutical agencies like Pfizer and Moderna, to get through something to provide the market in terms of vaccines. And what do we find out now about the repercussions of that action? That action which changed the lives of millions and millions of people around the world forever. You know, that's the one thing I think about with Donald Trump. When it comes to the rest of it, he seems like he's probably the best out of the bunch, with that, you know, massive caveat in mind.
Yeah. Well, and if there was fair sort of application of the law, we talked about this last time, there's like an average of like 3 felonies per president, so it's not uncommon. But the fact that they all seem to get away with it, and he seems to be the only one facing any sort of consequence for relatively minor considerations, it says something. And finally, we started on sort of a bitter note, but on a positive note, let's talk a little bit about Oliver Anthony. This individual with this hit, a series of now hit songs coming out. He seems to just be a good guy, and he's turned the sort of country music industry on their head. This at a time when the country music industry is starting to have like same-sex marriages within music videos, and they're bringing drag queens to country music awards, trying to push that so fervently. Then Oliver Anthony comes out and puts out this genuine, like real country music about struggling working class folks. Oliver Anthony turns down an $8 million recording contract. I read that he lives in a $750 camper that he bought off Craigslist. He just wants to play music. He doesn't want to turn into the next Taylor Swift. Imagine everybody in this day and age is aspiring to be the next sort of famous social media phenomenon. It is so incredible to see somebody who's just an earnest, down-to-earth guy. He talks about struggling with mental illness, and he's trying to kind of get his life together, and he just wants to play music for folks. That's the most country thing I think I've ever heard. What a positive song. Have you had a chance to hear the Rich Men of North Richmond song yet?
I've heard it briefly in passing. Yes, it's good, and
Yeah,
it's also something that you don't see too often because it's just spoken from the heart.
yeah,
Everything nowadays is monetized, right? You look at the
yeah,
music boards; it's all there. There's something in there where money is at the heart of it. And
yeah,
it's always good to see artists who exist outside of that realm. However, that comes with a consequence of if you're there only speaking from the heart and you're not looking to make any money, well, yeah, you're not going to rise to the upper echelons of the music industry simply because that's not your goal, which means that you're not going to get as
yeah.
much visibility. So it's a trade-off, and it means that you're always going to have to seek out those not smaller minded individuals, but smaller people that stick to a smaller arena, like this individual. You always have to seek them out. They will never be presented to you by the industry, at least.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's just it. I love the industry starts pushing this narrative and almost fittingly, just perfectly, this authentic. The amount of times we're seeing so many people talk about grassroots activism, grassroots music, whatever it may be, but it's incredible to see an actual instance where without an artificial push, without boosting, without the music industry telling us this is the next big thing, this individual has just, because of the transparency, the clarity of his message, and the fact that he's speaking to something that so many people, and it doesn't matter where you are, but particularly I think rural Western country loving Canadians, and people in the United States who are having a hard time because of inflation, because of bad government decisions, because of politicians like Justin Trudeau who are disconnected from the reality that the rest of us are living in. Because of all of those factors, his message hit at just the absolute perfect time. I know he's skirting away from politicking and not trying to make it too much about that and just saying he wants to play music. But imagine if this became someone, I won't say who, maybe Donald Trump, maybe somebody else. Imagine if this became the sort of song for their campaign, though. That would be something else altogether. That would be something to see. On that note, we do have one chat, I believe, here that I want to get to before we wrap up. Ableist SL, always great to have you. You're always chatting. It's so wonderful to have some regulars chiming in. He asks, do you think the Trudeau administration and other globalist conspirators are actively conspiring to hold on to power to evade post-communist Romania-style reprisals? I think they're trying to hold on to power. I think that is definitely the case. And if we do see a fall election, a rush election, which I don't know if we're going to see, but if we do, they're probably going to do it right during the height of new COVID restrictions and say anyone opposed to this is an extremist. There's going to be a lot of fear mongering and agendas driven into that, and they're going to try and grab on to one more. Otherwise, they're going to delay it as much as possible and try and shift to new leadership. Those are the two likely scenarios, or completely rebrand themselves somehow. But for progressives in this day and age, there doesn't seem to be. Now, I don't think there would be post-communist Romania-style reprisals. That would be pretty hefty. But there doesn't seem to be any reprisal for progressives, no matter what they do when they're in politics. They simply get to go away. People like Donald Trump face charges and are potentially even held up on them. So I think they are trying to hold on to it, but I don't know if they suspect. I think they think they're immune at this point. With the language and rhetoric that Justin Trudeau has volleyed over the past few years, I don't think you talk like that if you think that anyone is ever going to come after you with any real consequences. I think he's oblivious and thinks he's immune to any reprimand whatsoever. Would you agree?
Yeah, and it's the same playbook that we saw slip out of Catherine McKenna years ago, where she said, you just say it loud enough and over again, and they'll believe you. That's their mentality. Say it loud enough, say it proudly enough, and they'll believe you. And that's the approach that we continue to see. And it's one thing when it comes to Trudeau and why he's going to be out of office soon. Well, it's the same thing I believe with any narcissist. They go into a workplace environment and they manipulate and take advantage of people, and then eventually over time people catch on, and then they've got to pack up their stuff, leave, and go to the next place, and they do this over again. But everybody knows Justin Trudeau's name. He's got nowhere to hide at this point. So people just keep on looking further and further into the grossness of his cause and his nature, and that is going to perpetuate us into a new conservative government in the years ahead. And the one caveat there, or concern I would propose for the federal Conservative Party, is not to get caught up in the looming victory. Sure, it's going to happen, but don't be too proud of yourself for replacing Justin Trudeau, because it's a replacement. It's not necessarily a victory lap. I mean, he won 2 elections during the pandemic. This is time that things could have changed, but here we are, and his time has now come.
Well, and the Conservatives, as Sheila said a couple of weeks back, are renowned for snatching defeat out of their opponents' jaws. So they definitely shouldn't get ahead of themselves. But yeah, I do thank Ablis for chiming in with that, and Sid for your commentary on that. I think lots of these big donations, whether it be to various China advisory councils or to the Hillary Clinton Foundation, whatever, I think some of those might be game planning for Justin Trudeau's future career, to say the very least. Though a government official wouldn't do that, of course, that would be absurd. But that might be part of that. Sid, I want to thank you so much, especially for your sort of personal testimony and sharing about the reporting you've been doing on the heartbreaking case of Sheila Annette Lewis. I think it's important for folks to hear that story. So thank you so much for that. I want to thank everyone in the studio for your incredible work, for making this show possible, for keeping us on the air and getting us back online after that brief little hiccup there. And most importantly, I want to thank everyone at home for tuning in, watching us, chipping in, making this show possible. We couldn't do it without you. As always, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Sos.
As this clean electricity regulation draft 1 sits, absolutely not. There is no way that we can implement that here in Alberta. I mean, for one, cost estimates, $1.7 trillion. It's trillion with a T. Who's going to pay for that? Albertans, Canadians, on their bills, on their taxes. That is not something that we can accept right now. We also can't accept something that would put the reliability of our electricity grid at risk. The NDP in Saskatchewan even pointed out that the clean electricity regulations are absolutely unreasonable. And yet here in Alberta, we continue to see the